Let me know when to
Hi.
let me
It's,
know when to start. Yeah.
yeah. Hi. This is our 11th session of the Dark Baithak. The idea about the Dark Baithak came from the larger work that the Dark does, which is scholars sharing their work. And now this is a weekly Saturday, 4 p.m. meeting for all of us to come together and hear other scholars about the varied interests and research that they're doing. Today, we're so happy to have Dr. Shrabana Barua with us, who is an assistant professor and the director of the Nejing Pao Ginn Center for Southeast Asian Studies at the OP Jindal University. Her expertise lies in geopolitics in South and Southeast Asia, especially in topics such as infrastructure and connectivity, issues pertaining to Myanmar and Pakistan, multilateral groups such as ASEAN, BIMSTEC, etc. She is the co-editor of the book India's Nuclear Titans, a biographical tales, which was published in 2023. Previously, she has also worked with the Indian Council of World Affairs, the Gateway House, Indian Council on Global Relations, Hindu College, and the Nepal Institute of International Cooperation and Engagement at Kathmandu. The discussant for this talk is going to be Dr. Sanjukta Nath, who's an assistant professor at the University School of Law, Liberal Arts at the Guru Gobind Singh Indraprasth University. She specializes in gender, international security, international politics, and international law. She is also an editor and one of the founding members of the DAAK. Dr. Shrabana, it's over to you now.
Okay. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thanks to Dr. Sanjukta Nath for inviting me here. What I will do is, I believe I have about 30 minutes, so I have some time to give some background of what is happening in Myanmar, particularly since the coup, but just laying out a background on what Myanmar exactly is, how should we, what are the facts and histories, narratives and histories that we should draw from the past so that we can assess the 2021 coup better. So first 15 minutes I'll just spend on that. And then of course the next 15 minutes I will go on to give an assessment of what is currently happening in the country, emphasize on a change of pattern in terms of the coup from 2021 onwards. And as you can see, the title of my talk is Evading Peace. So we will discuss about what the future lies for Myanmar, particularly given that elections have finally been, elections had been announced long back, but it looks like it's going to take place by end of this year. So let me begin assuming that the audience will be a mixed crowd of college students as well as maybe some academicians and even an analyst in the field. uh, just the fact that many people who don't observe Myanmar or study the country do not know certain basic things, including the fact that there are 7 states and 7 regions. And when we talk about Myanmar, these states and regions are important to understand because the regions are divided in such a way. The 7 states that are there, which includes, say, the Chin, for example, which borders Mizoram, the northeast state of India. Similarly, we have Kachin, Mon. These are states, Rakhine state. These are states which form part, which are majority ethnic population, and they are divided in such a way that are when the process of nation making took place after Burma's independence in 1948, they basically said that we are different from the majority Bamars in the country. And the Bamars rule the central part of the country. And most of the central part of the country are divided in 7 regions, unlike the periphery, mostly periphery of Myanmar, which are the 7 states with different ethnic groups that really drive those different states. And this distinction is very important because when today we talk about the complicated ethnic armed organizations fighting the different, in fact, there are infightings also within the ethnic armed organization. But when we are talking about the ethnic armed organizations, they are not a united bunch. Some of them have fought together, especially since the 2021 coup. Some of them have been part of a federal solution, but not everybody is same. People have different demands. The Kachins may have a different demand from, say, the Rakhine people of the Rakhine state, which again, we'll talk about the different armed organizations and how that equation plays out. But the basic point is that the country itself is divided into 7 states, which are largely made up of ethnic groups, and 7 regions, and mainly the central part of Burma, now Myanmar, is it includes the Bamar majority, and of course, there's one union territory, which is the national capital, Naypyidaw. Now, once we understand this, and it's a big country which has, it's just slightly smaller than, say, the US state of Texas. It's quite a big country. It has a population of around 55 million people. Now, when we look at this, and mind you, it has been a while that the census last took place. Again, a point that needs to be kept in mind, particularly as we talk of upcoming elections in the country. But point is that Myanmar's population, which in the popular reading that you have today in the public domain, is roughly about 55 million. And as of 2021, this is the number that we have. And today, the internally displaced people in the country since the 2021 coup has moved from 3 below 3 million to 3.3 plus million as of 2025. So there's been a lot of displacement since the coup. And these people are coming from all across the country. And these states, particularly that I mentioned, there's been a lot of displacement in these different states because if you look at the way the fighting has taken place since 2021, something that I'll emphasize on the latter part of the talk, the conflict, unlike in, say, 1988 onwards, it has been taking place towards the Indian border. It has moved. The conflict has lot of conflict and lot of displacement towards the western part of the country, which nears the Indian border. But just going back to a couple of other facts that we need to understand within this context is the fact that Myanmar has had a history of coups. It has had a history of overthrowing of governments and largely being ruled by the military. Now, Myanmar, which till 1988, when it was a sort of a second watershed movement, if I can say so, because the first watershed movement happened when Ne Win took over power. General Ne Win was the first one who had a coup, and he actually displaced the so-called democratically elected government of Burma at that point, which was in place as per their first constitution. So for the first time, a coup of that nature happened was in 1962 when the military took over. And mind you, General Ne Win ruled for many, many, many years. There were problems during his rule as well. And we see that that problem eventually led to a second constitution in Myanmar in 1974. And from that, again, the main problem was that the process of nation building that had begun, it couldn't really come to a satisfactory end in terms of the ethnic groups, largely the states and the Bamar dominant military that existed in the central part. And there was a Panglong agreement as early as 1947, where 3 groups, for example, the 3 groups came and said that this is the kind of federal structure that we want. So, in short, that there has been a continuing problem of ethnic and federal question. And that is what really we see even in the current conflict. After the 1974 constitution came into place, things did not look upward even then, meaning that the military was still in power for majority part. But in 1988, what we see is why I say this is one of the second watershed movement, a moment in Myanmar, was because particularly on 8th August 1988, there was the uprising, which was brutally, there was a brutal crackdown on that, which the world really took note of. And that particular movement became a watershed because it was, from then, it was a pre 8888 Myanmar or a post 8888 Myanmar. And mind you, that is the period also when democratic questions were being taken up. That is also the period when the National League for Democracy, which was led by Aung San Suu Kyi, came into being. That was also the period when Burma changed its name to Myanmar, and certain such changes took place. So from 1990, when the first elections were held and the NLD really came to power but wasn't really allowed to take over, that was first time we see that, again, if you can call, some call it a coup within a coup, because even General Nevin had to give up power. There was a new administration in place, and of course then the government that was formed, sort of democratic government that should have been formed, could not come to power. And Aung San Suu Kyi's story, I think, is worldwide known by now. And she was put in jail, and opposition members were put in jail. So what happened at that point of time is something similar to what was repeated in 2021. But from 1990 to 2020, there has been certain developments in Myanmar that we should keep in mind when we study the current context. There were certain attempts, no matter however misplaced, to bring in democracy in on paper at least. So, for instance, we see in 2004 there was a 7-step roadmap to democracy that was put in place by General Kim Newt. Then we see 2008 a constitution for the third time came into being, which talk about bringing in all these groups together. Yet it said that 25% of the seats in the parliament are going to be going to the military, basically. So again, there's been a dissatisfaction, but nevertheless, some attempt constitutionally to put democracy in place. Now, the story of democracy itself, I think, has been really shaky in Myanmar. The fact that in 2010, which eventually actually saw democratic elections, unfortunately, or in whatever way you put it, it was boycotted by the NLD because they did not accept the 2008 constitution. And that's important to keep in mind, because if the elections are going to happen this year in 2025, we have to keep in mind that it is the same 2008 elections that is being, constitution that is being followed. So it's not like there's been a change. But nevertheless, from 2010, we see the military government come to power. There were some attempts to bring in genuine democracy, though many do not agree to that. But we see a lot of Western countries, for instance, take note of the developments in Myanmar. We see external players beyond China, beyond Thailand come into. We have had a lot of foreigners, Western statesmen visit the country, for instance. And that these kind of developments brought in some goodwill and a little bit of notice towards this country, Myanmar, which otherwise in most of the literature is called a pariah state, that nobody really wanted to befriend Myanmar except China. We'll come to the story of China when we see what happens in the 2001 onwards, at least what China has been doing. But roughly the point is that we have not been able to study Myanmar as thoroughly. Only in 2015, the NLD, when it participated in the second elections after 2010, when other elections happened in 2015, NLD came to power, though Aung San Suu Kyi couldn't get the title of Prime Minister or President. She was the state councillor. And again in 2020, we see NLD coming back to power, or should have come back to power. And this is when the military realized that they've had enough of this democracy for 2 decades, and there was a need to put a stop to that. And therefore, on 1st February 2021, we see what really happened, that the coup really took place, and the NLD government and the NLD-led government was put, in fact, there was a stop to that. And thereon we see what is happening from 2021. We see that the Myanmar coup has unfolded. Some call it the third coup, some call it the second. In now, coming to the analysis part of it, this has been roughly a bit of a history of what's been happening in Myanmar. But let's look at the coup a little more in detail so that we understand. Now, 2021 to about 23, 2020, 22, 23 onwards, that's been a period one of the coup, if I can put it like that. From then to about 2024 end, maybe September, that is part two of the coup. And what has been unfolding, particularly this year, is phase three of the coup. And again, this is my reading of the coup. But why I put it in three phases is because the phase one was where we see that there was a balance or an equal fight between the two sides. And mind you, the two sides are very complicated. There is no clear two sides. Of course, there is the military on one side. We have the junta government, the state administrative council that was put in place in 2021, led by General Min Aung Hlaing. And on the other hand, we see a group of people, which is a mixed bunch of a lot of things. Now, we had the NUG in place, which is the parallel government in exile. Then we had, under that same government, many ethnic groups as well as people joined that fight against the military, something which had not really happened earlier. There were fights, of course, there was resistance against the military, but quite a joining of hands on the other side, which had been unprecedented. So that gave an impression that for the first time in history, the military or the Tatmadaw was facing losses in terms of territory, as we will see in the second phase when I talk about 2023-24. The second phase, when the military really lost out on territories in many ways, and then in 24 and to 25, currently what we see. I'll come to that, but basically the ethnic armed organizations, lot of them joined hands and in fact also tied up with the NUG or supported the NUG in many ways. Now within the NUG, there was also the People's Defense Forces. We have people really picking up weapons and fighting against the military and giving enough of competition, if I can use that word, giving quite a bit of resistance to the Tatmadaw and the military. And that is what led to a lot of territorial losses. By the 2022 onwards, we saw a lot of morale loss, lot of people within the military leaving, deserting. Examples of how they were deserting the military was quite shocking, or, it was quite out in the open and people were leaving and going. I also see that the Tatmadaw did not have full control of its people, of its men. We have Min Aung Hlaing on the top, but we also see very close attacks which physically came close to Min Aung Hlaing actually, which earlier he was untouched, So we see these kind of patterns really develop. But when we study that phase, we see a lot of conflict on the western part. Now, one or two players that really took the cake was Arakan Army, for instance. We see the rise of Arakan Army, and Arakan Army is a group that was quite new, or rather, if you can put it, it was a new kid in the block. It came up and suddenly, and there are younger people who are part of this group. They managed to capture a lot of territory. They managed to structurally be more, the Arakan Army was structurally and in terms of their control, they were in control of things, in short, to put it simply. And all of these factors takes this conflict to phase two. Now, phase two, what you see is Operation 1027, for instance. Now, Operation 1027 was brought out by this Three Brotherhood Alliance. And this Three Brotherhood Alliance made up of Arakan Army, the TNLA, and the MNDAA. Now, these three groups got together and put a very bold and strong force against the military in November 2020. And that is what really gave a shock to the military for the first time on ground. Similarly, and almost parallelly, just a couple of weeks later, we see Operation 1111 in the Karenni state, the Kaya state, where we see again three parties in the Karenni state come together and really resist the military on ground. So they were losing territories one after the other, something that had not happened in the past. Now, when we look at that second phase, there was an analysis in most parts of the region as well as Western analysis that the balance is tilting towards the ethnic armed organization as well as the, if not the NUG per se, but the military was really losing this battle or this conflict. But what the military continued to do is basically put up a strong force. They had resorted to lot older means like burning of villages, using drones to attack people, and of course that gave a very good fight to these smaller groups who did not have enough means to put up a strong front for too long. And this is what was studied by geoeconomists, social scientists who were looking at the kind of displacement that was happening, the humanitarian crisis that was happening, the problems that really happened in Myanmar, including natural disasters. We currently, when we talk about this year, in fact, we saw the earthquake that really shook Myanmar, and these really exaggerated and exasperated people's needs in terms of humanitarian assistance. And we also see the global community therefore responding, because they didn't know what else to do. They were failing in their attempts to bring peace to on the table by the time we were in our second phase of the conflict, because the ASEAN had tried its 5 point consensus, not much happened. Thailand had in fact started talking about a humanitarian corridor. It did have a humanitarian corridor in place, but many analysts say that it was not that much of a success that they would have wished to, because they didn't know who to contact on ground. Should they contact the EAO? Should they contact the junta leaders? Because mind you, that phase was also, we didn't know who was in control of which territory and to what extent, right? So a lot of problems that common people had faced, and by the time we were in second phase, we knew that this conflict is going to really get prolonged, because we see resistant movement also winning, and of course military facing problems that they had not faced earlier, but at the end of the day they persisted. And if we move on, and this is again just to wind up in 5 minutes, because I'm not very sure if I can go on and on. I want to finish up and wrap up in half an hour. But we also see when we move on to the third phase, why I call it a third phase, and I'm sure this analysis again has been there's been a persistent analysis of this kind. It's not that people really differ. Currently, what is happening is that we see the Tatmadaw regaining some of the territories they had lost earlier. To give you a very small example, Lashio was one of the important posts that the MNDA, one of the players of the Three Brotherhood Alliance, had gained in northern Shan from the military. It was a very important post that they should have continued to hold. But it is said that at the insistence and at the influence of China, eventually they gave up Lashio this year. That's just one very small example. If we talk about the Karenni state, for instance, again, because in Operation 111, when we see a lot of action in the Kaya state, actually, it has two names. Some of these get confusing because, they have two names. But point is that even then, we see a township called Demoso there was given up, which was earlier within the ethnic control. So we see a lot of these examples where now the military has started regaining some of these territories. So point is that they have persisted like they did in the 1950s, 60s, 1980s, and so on. So now there is a assessment that the military is going to go ahead with elections. And mind you, elections have been announced earlier; they could never really take place. An emergency which was declared in 2021, and each emergency period was for 6 months, and 6 times the emergency went on and on. It was renewed every time. But currently, last month they ended the state of emergency, and then they said that we are now going to, the state of emergency has really come to an end. Elections are going to take place, and we will be going ahead with a democratic sort of government with 2008 elections in constitution in place. Now, how do we read this development? If you look at the data and the number, it's not that the military has really control of so many, and there are 330 townships in the entire country. A lot of data really shows that about 40 to 45% of those townships is what the military will hold the elections in. And even if they manage to do that, they are good. They will say, look, we have the numbers, we have had elections in at least 45-50% of the territory. We have got the legitimacy therefore to go ahead. And then the story will go like, or this is the assessment that most people make, including I, that the elections will take place in the coming future, in the near future, irrespective of who agrees, who doesn't agree. Secondly, the fact that now they have gained, when I say they, I mean the Tatmadaw, they've gained back some of their territories, they feel more powerful. On the other hand, there is a weakening in terms of spirit as well as bond amongst these ethnic armed organizations. Only this year, in June, for instance, the MNDA quickly called for a meeting, emergency meeting, and the reason was that they were fighting again the Shans. There are different groups. Another group, basically, Shan State Party North. Again, they have two names, so sometimes these get confusing. But point is that they had a major fight with the other group, and as Shan State Party North had also had a fight with TNLA, and TNLA and others. Basically, they are having infightings, and these infightings are growing. And this is quite evident to the military. So they are feeling confident. The reason for these infightings can obviously be an entire different discussion. The fact that there is no united front in terms of the opposition. There's something in 2000 and in 2000 and I don't remember the exact date, but around 2017, when the question for federalism was still ongoing, and Aung San Suu Kyi was really testing her grounds with what she called Panglong 2.0. It is at that point of time that the FPNCC was put in place, the Federal Political Negotiation Consultative Committee, and that group had many of these ethnic armed organizations. And now the question is, will that really persist, or will they, because if they're all part of this grouping, which is negotiating democracy, but they're all fighting one another, they really don't know what they want at the end of the day. So there is no cohesion in that demand for whether you call it confederation, whether you call it a separate statehood, it really depends. So that is the current scenario. What I would assume is that these infightings would continue for the near future, because also there's a little bit of tension in terms of how the military has really gone ahead with its strategy in terms of its saving of its face. And when I say saving its face, I also mean in terms of putting a face in the international forum. Only recently, we see that Prime Minister Modi met up with Min Aung Hlaing, and there's a talk about how the real winner in this SCO summit was not even Putin and Xi and Modi. It was really Min Aung Hlaing who went there and really shook hands with everybody, and nobody said anything. So point is, even the world is getting sort of tired of this conflict and wants to end it in some way. And mind you, Trump doesn't have as much attention in Myanmar to say, I'll bring in peace. It's China that has really been doing. It is China that had managed to bring the MNDA, for instance, on the table with the SAC. It is China that had managed to bring the TNLA on the table. So, without having that kind of a mediator, we don't really see others, external partners, really saying something very strongly. China will be happy to see where this goes. India will agree to go ahead with Tatmadaw, or go ahead with whoever is in power in the capital, at least. And we have increasing stakes today in Myanmar. So I think this is what the current situation is. So we don't, the question at the end of the day, again, is Myanmar really evading peace, or is there going to be there is some sort of peace on paper with an upcoming election, with some kind of negotiation that can possibly take place between the ethnic groups and the Tatmadaw. I'll rest my case here and wait for the questions and discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shrabana Barua. Now I'll invite Sanjukta Nath to please go ahead, Dr. Sanjukta Nath, to please go ahead and be the discussant for the particular talk. In the meantime, if there is anybody who has questions, we will come to them towards the end, but if you're more comfortable typing them in the chat box, please go ahead. Dr. Sanjukta Nath, over to you.
Thank you, Sakshi. Thank you, Dr. Shrabana, for accepting to talk to us today. It was a very good talk. I think I was also reading about Myanmar, and then today it makes sense because the history and everything. Since it's also, we have been looking at Myanmar, particularly me, from a very human security Rohingya perspective, to be very, very fair. So nobody goes back to the colonial past and how the two countries, India and Myanmar, basically had a independence 1 year after. So India got independence in 47 and Myanmar in 48, if I'm not wrong. So again, colonial borders and everything, that's what we have been looking into it. But the current situation of the region is as such that I think the international community also has something called amnesia, right? Amnesia. For example, like if you are really something which is not bothering the West, that is not their direct concern. So the concern, I totally agree how you ended with it and saying it is China which is trying to be the bigger player there and trying to bring in some sort of peace. And India is trying to maneuver around so that its projects are not going to get hampered. Different projects that and I would like to is it possible if we can have like one or two, like can I have one question first and then I think it's going to be, otherwise it's going to be too much informative for the session. I think the first question that I would like to ask her, and it's also her field, is the infrastructural diplomacy part. Yeah. So I would like to see how, one, the whole highway projects and the Kaladan projects, if a Kaladani projects, if I'm not wrong, right?
Yes.
Yes, right. So these two projects, since before 2021, India was trying in talks with it. Post 2022, 2021, India somehow had a halt in it and went one to Bangladesh route and then went to have that, okay, let us not use Myanmar, but we can use Bangladesh also to get the route. But since right now, given our not a very good situation or relationship with Bangladesh, we really need Myanmar for our northeast connectivity, I think. So how do you think the infrastructural development in that region happening, and how is this election?
Okay, so what I understand is you're asking about how are we looking at the Kaladan project today, and what has been, because you mentioned about Bangladesh, about Myanmar, and how we are navigating it. And if the elections happen, then what about the project, if I'm not wrong? So the most recent announcement that has been made, and mind you, this is coming from the Minister of Port Shipping, which is Sarbananda Sonowal. And he said that we will complete the project by 2027. And that's a recent announcement that has really happened. Another development that is important to note within the Northeast particularly, is the fact that the inland waterways are in, at least there have been a lot of attempt to revive some of these inland waterways, because Kaladan project is, like you mentioned, it's a multimodal transit project. It has one section through the sea from, say, Kolkata to what we have a port at Sitwe, and Sitwe is very close to the Chinese port down south at Chokpu. Now, China has already had its play, has everything almost in place at Chokpu, and from there are different pipelines, oil pipelines, gas pipelines that go all the way up to Kunming in northwest China. So, of course, our initial idea, I believe, was twofold. One is that, firstly, we already had a look-east policy in place from the 1990s, and 2000 and early 2000s, when we started really looking at different projects towards our east. Myanmar was the first one that was immediately next to, it's touching borders with four of our northeastern states. So we realized we really needed to do something, but obviously we did not go ahead and announce a big project like Kaladan. What we did was we opened up, for instance, the Tamu More border had a little road which eventually got called the Friendship Road from Manipur into Myanmar, and which still exists. So some of these things that happened made us realize we have a lot of opportunities and possibilities if we open up the Northeast into Myanmar. And that is when in 2008-10, we really put this project in place. Now, since 2010, it's been more than, 10 plus years. And the question is, what are we really doing? Why are we unable to complete this project? Now, this project has been completed to certain parts. There are ships that can go to Sitwe. From Sitwe, there's an inland transit through the Kaladan River. And from the Kaladan River, there's a place in Paletua, then there's a road basically that goes, and from there to Zorinpui, and from Zorinpui onwards, it'll possibly connect also through railways. In Manipur, for instance, the railway now goes up to Jiribam. So point is, this whole project eventually started looking like a concrete project. But when it was announced, it was more, I would say, more imaginative than reality, that they said we will do this, this and this, while the ground reality was something else. Can you do, A, B, and C? And therefore, we see the Indian government also most of the time dodging these questions on delays, saying that there is instability, there is insurgency. We have completed some part of the project, but haven't been able to do the rest because of these reasons. So the other factor is the fact that when Sheikh Hasina's regime was in power, we had Bangladesh open to us, something that we didn't have when she was not in power. So obviously, at that point of time, India saw it as a better option to go from India to Myanmar and then Myanmar onwards to Northeast, right? But when we had Myanmar open this project, the rationale for this project, one part of that rationale was somewhere missing because Bangladesh was open. But today we again have a Bangladesh which is problematic for us. So again, the rationale for completing this project really becomes important for us, the strategic aspect of it. So again, we see a renewed attention towards this project. The fact that we have announced that it's going to finish off by in the next 2 years, we have had one shipment go. I don't remember the date, but we've inaugurated parts of the project. In fact, Minister Sonwal was there to inaugurate that part of the project. So we are really pushing that at the moment, with the hope, however, that things will move ahead peacefully with India and Myanmar. The only concern now is that most of the Rakhine region, except for parts of Sitwe and few others, are held by the Arakan army today. So the question is, should India therefore engage with the Arakan army, or should it continue to engage with the Arakan army's opponents? That's the military, which we already do. But India has, if not openly, it has had many interactions and it's out in the public domain as well, that we are beginning to see how we can engage with the Arakan army, how we can keep our, because it's now become a strategic, not just a geo-economic, but a strategic asset for us. So we are obviously trying to go slowly and see what the developments are. Even if the elections happen, we are in talks with the military. If they win, fine. If they don't win, even then we have opened up our channels with other players in the region. So we are trying to obviously protect this project wholeheartedly and hoping for its completion in 2027.
Thank you, Shrabana. I have another question. I think something, because of the paucity of time, that you could not also look at is the whole China angle there, and how China since very beginning has tried to have good ties with the rebel groups, if I can call them that, any multiple ethnic group. And since you have clearly said there are different rebel groups, Chin region is different, Rakhine region is different, Three Brotherhood also army has three different types of armies ethnically grouped. So if you could highlight the importance of this ethnically different group and how they are right now infighting, which is also helping the army to hold their grounds back. And how
That
the role of China, it's very interesting to see how China is playing there. So that's there. Because since ASEAN cannot have that much of an effect there right now. So how is China there? Vis-a-vis, maybe if you would like to see India, but yeah, China and China's angle here.
Okay, so I mean, I can see two questions there, and one is very complicated, one is manageable. One is that how are there infightings within these groups? Now, I have already explained one or two examples, right? That, for instance, even the three players of the Three Brotherhood Alliance are now in different, somewhere going in different paths. Now, there, if you combine the Three Brotherhood Alliance, which is the MNDAA in the Kokang, in the Shan, basically northern part of the country, then you have TNLA, and then you have the Arakan Army, right? Now, with them, at one point of time, the KIA was really involved with them, and they called themselves the Northern Alliance, and they were again at some point fighting. But and on the other hand, you also have other groups in Shan that I've already mentioned. Say Progressive Party, Shan. So now imagine these three or four groups. Three of them are also fighting between each other. And then in Shan, you have the Shan State Party again fighting with MNDA separately. That's why, like I said, MNDA quickly had to call for a meeting in June this year, because they're like, what is happening? If we are doing this, how are we going to? There are examples of how they are trying to control different posts. When I say post, is that they have their territory defined in terms of their administration. Now, once you have administrations that are just defined by them but not accepted by others, the other party is saying this is our part of the zone. And of course, then there are governance issues. And mind you, some of these checkposts, you are really taking toll from them. Now, who should that toll money go to? So, of course, then there are clashes. So that picture is more and more complicated. If I take you from there and come to Chin, for instance, now you have the Chin Brotherhood Alliance, which has different parties within it, and then you have the Chin National Army. Now, the Chin National Army was fighting at some point of time with the Chin Brotherhood Alliance, and that itself has 5 different parties. So it's basically a very, very complicated situation. If you look at the infightings and who is fighting who, you have to really do a PhD on that, to be honest. But how is China coming into the picture? Now, China, mind you, has been a player in Myanmar for the longest time now. Even during the 8888 rebellion or uprising, if you call it, it was only China that befriended Myanmar, the new Myanmar that had come about. And soon after, China had that their Tiananmen Square incident, very similar to this 8888 uprising. So they found comfort in each other, and of course, a lot of projects began. I did mention this in my PhD as well, and I bring it very often, in 1985, 84, 85, the Vice Minister of Communication in China, and this we are talking about the mid 80s, where nobody even looked at Burma at that point of time, right? It was the Vice Minister of Communication in China, Pan Chi, who said that, if we look at our northwestern provinces, they are very poorly developed. And that's obviously we know about China's Western Development Project and so on, how they really tried to bring out the best in Yunnan and different provinces and everything. But when he looked at that project or that part of China, they looked at also Myanmar, which was seen as an outlet to the Bay of Bengal and then to the Indian Ocean. So they really saw strategic value in a country where nobody was paying attention to. So the friendship goes back to even before that. And this is despite the fact that in history you have had anti-China sentiments also. Because the Kuomintang in those days really settled themselves in upper parts of Burma. And there were a lot of anti-Chinese clashes that also you get to see once in a while today. But point is, China really found a foothold over many of these ethnic parts of the country, particularly northern Burma. Now, one of the biggest ethnic armed groups and oldest is the United States War Army. It's one of the biggest, USWA. China has quite a bit of control over that group. If you look at the MNDA, I gave you the example of Lashio, that it was actually it is actually said by experts that it is at China's insistence that the MNDA finally gave up Lashio. And it is China at a time in 2021-22 when ASEAN was failing to bring about any sort of peace and bring about ceasefire. It is China that brought about a ceasefire within the MNDA and the SAC, which eventually obviously died out. But nevertheless, it was China that brought it about and not any other third player or a multilateral body. So China has really had its influence over this group. Now, the other important group or forum is the FPNCC that I mentioned, right? Which was created before this coup. And this was an attempt at federalism. And this federal political negotiations and consultative committee, which has about 7 members within it, if you look at that group today, they've had only one meeting at a summit level when all of them, and this was at the insistence of the KI at some point. And since then, they've really not met. And this really reflects on what I was saying, that there's no cohesion per se. And they had met at a time when China was trying to come in as a player and bring in negotiation and peace on the table. And the fact that the FPNCC today is influenced heavily by China. Many of his players and partners are influenced heavily by China. Again, we see that the only other option that we have is either that the ASEAN brings in something new and gets more creative, because the 5-point consensus has not really worked. Even their special envoy, there's a attempt at bringing in a special envoy who can go, and hopefully there's a clause that says it should be allowed to meet even Aung San Suu Kyi and NLD members. So many of these attempts have really failed. But whatever success, no matter whether they've been real, substantive or not, they have really been by the Chinese. So today, I think the fact that China has made this position in that country. There are some who question that no, now the ethnic armed groups are, because they are really winning a war. So they will obviously keep China also at bay, because their nationalism is very strong. True that it is strong, and therefore they've come all this way, right? And they have kept China at bay. There are instances which do prove that Chinese have been kept once in a while at bay, but not really. The real influence still has been strong. Minangling has been able to have good meetings with the Chinese. So that's where China at least is at the moment. And other players are having to wait and watch, and actually at times even depend on China in that.
Thank you. I think it was too long questions.
Yeah,
And
it's like it's a little
yeah,
complicated to
I know.
explain, but
Yeah. Thank you. But I would like to end and let's see if anybody else has any other questions
Yeah, if there's
before.
anybody, okay, Sakshi, but Vatwa, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you, Dr. Barua, for the comprehensive talk. So, just one question on US stand on Myanmar, especially post the earthquake that happened recently. So, like there were articles and opinion pieces by IR scholars saying that it was a chance that US missed. They could have helped with the humanitarian aid and kind of eased out the situation, something that happened back in Obama's time when he started, he initiated he initiated those engagements for kind of a compromise or negotiation. And then a related question is this Trump administration's like the recent stance on Myanmar and how NUG is being supported. Like they claim that they support it even now, but what is actually the real situation and how US kind of looks at it? If you could shed some light on it.
okay, so again, if you go back to the Obama administration, these were different times. This was the pre-coup time when Burma or Myanmar had started getting some attention from the Western world, like I said. From the 2011-12, there was President Thein Sein in power at that point of time. We see a phase where Myanmar opened up to other players, and in fact, China was pushed back a little. We see some of the Chinese projects being halted. There are two major projects. One is a dam, one is a copper mine, copper mine basically in Myanmar. So at that point of time, we see Myanmar opening up to the Western world, and the US found a good way to come into the country, not in terms of strategy as much, but in terms of, like you mentioned, what they could do with humanitarian assistance, with how they could really help the people at that point of time and bring in democracy. And democracy had just begun to set in. 2015 was the first time when a real party was in power, right? Because before that, it was the military. So that was a different time. And 2017, the whole Rohingya issue triggered again. And we see the West sanctioning Myanmar and really putting Aung San Suu Kyi in a difficult position. And all of these things were the question of human rights, humanitarian assistance, and democracy was more on the front page than anything else. But of course, when the coup happened, we also see US trying to come in mostly the way that they brought out, for instance, what they call the Burma Act. If you look at the Burma Act, it had different, basically, it said that we will give this much money and bring about this much of relief and this much assistance. Now, when Trump came to power again, he just stopped that, like he stopped so many other things. Like, so it's like when the US aid stopped, lot of things including the allocations that really went to Burma Act. So all of this went into the back burner. So there has been a completely, there's been a complete change in Trump's, or rather the US's position on Myanmar in the recent couple of months. Now, the other thing that Trump brought in was his intention of, how rare earth material in China is something that suddenly we see people talking about. And Trump was the businessman that he is. He feels that he's going to make the gains out of it. And the other player in rare earth metal, say a little bit, of course, Singapore and a few players here and there, but it is China. So Trump says one thing and then does another thing. But in short, Myanmar is definitely not in his strategic calculations as of now. Therefore, we see nothing being done of Burma Act. The US aid has been really rolled back. Even people who have gotten help from US money, say a lot of internally displaced people, like I mentioned, a lot of people who were being trafficked, who got caught in different scams, online scams near the Burmese-Thai border, and there are many of them. So those people were being helped through NGOs and other forums, and all of that has really been stopped, which has added to the problems in Myanmar, if I could put it. And US president also suddenly he said, uh, we will remove some of these sanctions that we had against these allies. So suddenly the West also finds it difficult to read Trump's position, as is with any other thing, you know. So some of these companies which were linked to the military, they were sanctioned earlier. Uh, and suddenly Trump says, no, we'll remove those sanctions. And we are going to, he made a U-turn on many of those things. And that was not liked very much by at least the UN. The UN also has a special rapporteur on human rights in Myanmar. So there was a lot of dissatisfaction and disgruntlement on how Trump is handling Myanmar.
Are there any more questions? Anybody from the audience? Because there's nothing on the chat group, so I'm just going to wait for a minute if somebody else has any other questions. In the meantime, I'll thank Dr. Shrabana Barua for the engaging talk. I think Evading Peace truly captures what has been happening in Myanmar for quite some time. And having said which, infrastructural growth is something that we're all, Sakshi Batwa says, thank you for your answer. Having said which, I think infrastructural growth is something that most people have been looking at, specifically given the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative is the larger conversation around India's investments globally also becomes a very interesting and a very opportune moment. And Myanmar does become one of those test cases where India's larger infrastructural growths then become an important and pertinent question. Would you have any comments on this? Not really a question, but just in case you would want to add something to the larger global question on infrastructure.
I mean, see, infrastructure is obviously something that became a buzzword in the last decade. We were hearing of connectivity projects. Suddenly, there's a boom of this word because BRI was put in the picture, and again, BRI was linked to China's, say, the Global Security Initiative, and so on. And in 2019, in the second BRI forum, it was made a part of the constitution. It can't get bigger than that, right? So of course, there even those that were really ignoring infrastructure and China's BRI, or at least the connectivity and or infrastructure as a strategic tool for creating influence, they were forced to look into this domain. And overall, we see a lot of countries suddenly, of course, they were working on these issues. Even India was. And I've written a couple of few chapters and things here and there where I argue that uh, things like Bharat Mala and things, they were already there in the picture. It was Atal Bihari Vajpayee who had brought them in early 2000s and so on. But we also have had to really press on the accelerator on some of these things. And the Modi government was happy to do so because today we are, a big economy. So we have the capacity to deal with the topic or domain such as infrastructure, which smaller countries find it difficult. If you build a road and railway, you need a lot of money, and that is why only the colonizers earlier used to put money on infrastructure. In India, the British railways and telegraphs, they were infrastructure at some point, right? Nobody could build them. You need a lot of money. So today, of course, we are capable ourselves. And what I argue is that we have both a push factor and a pull factor. Internally, also, we are doing it, irrespective of if China would have done this or not. But externally, there are, increasing factors to sort of pull us on in that direction. Similarly, if you look at Japan, Japan was capable long back. But, and mind you, it was Japan. If you look at Laos, for instance, the big debate is how Laos's high-speed railway has eaten up their economy. More than 60% of their GDP, they are basically in debt they owe big time money to China, which is more than 60% of the GDP, just because of high-speed. So Japan was the first one who brought in high-speed railways in the 1960s. It was not China. But today the game has changed. So Japan again has started to respond in a way that maybe otherwise wouldn't have happened. We have things like the Blue Dot Network. Even within Japan, there's something called as the Partnership Quality Initiative, which was later made EPQI. We have Blue Dot Network. We have many of these initiatives that countries are bringing into the picture. We have the US also trying to look at infrastructure, but not necessarily connectivity ones, but say social infrastructure and smaller projects. Just as India also is doing a lot of smaller projects in neighboring countries. In Sri Lanka, for instance, we've had these housing projects that we did with them. So smaller social projects that we have completed. The US also increased these projects here and there and started giving more money. And we see the MCC in Sri Lanka, in Nepal. So suddenly, of course, in the last couple of years, in the last decade now, if I can say that, we've seen a boom in this. And that has become an important variable in geopolitics and geostrategy, something that did not exist. So infrastructure diplomacy has started coming up in the agendas. In ASEAN, we have the master plan for connectivity. Similarly, we have the same for BIMSTEC. So some of these multilateral groupings are putting infrastructure connectivity on the agenda in a big way.
Thank you so much. I
Mm.
don't think there are any more questions from our audience, so I'm going to call an end to the session for today. Thank you so much, Dr. Shrabana, for being part of the session, for this engaging talk. Thank you, Dr. Sanjukta Nath, for being a great discussant and asking the pertinent questions. Thank you for our audience. Looking forward for you to be joining us next Saturday for our next Baithak. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Mm.
and all my good wishes to the DAC.
Thank you. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.